You're not here by chance tonight. Your soul, tired of carrying the pain of others, seeks the liberation that Marcus Aurelius found while governing an empire, and the ancient wisdom of the Stoics will become the refuge that transforms your emotional suffering into unshakable inner power. You didn't arrive here tonight by accident. You're here because your soul craves calm, because something within you yearns to rest, not just your body, but your mind as well. The ancient Stoics understood this need deeply. They knew how to find peace amid chaos, how to quiet the restless spirit that carries the weight of daily struggles. Tonight, you'll hear their timeless wisdom, words written by men who faced wars, losses, betrayals, and still discovered serenity in the storm. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. These weren't armchair philosophers speaking from comfort. They spoke from the battlefield of human experience, from the arena where life tests us most severely. Their voices will become whispers tonight, gentle guides leading you toward the rest you desperately need. You don't need to understand everything. You don't need to memorize every phrase or analyze each concept. Simply listen. Let their teachings wash over your mind like rain cleansing dust from the earth. This isn't just another video. This is sanctuary. This is refuge. This is the place where you can finally set down the burdens you've been carrying. And remember that even in darkness, wisdom waits to be heard. Even in your weariest moments, strength can be found. Even when the world feels overwhelming, there exists within you an unshakable core of peace. The modern world assaults us with demands, expectations, and endless streams of information. We wake to notifications, spend our days reacting to circumstances beyond our control, and collapse into bed with minds still racing. But the Stoics lived through their own versions of chaos. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire while plague ravaged his people. Epictetus endured slavery before becoming one of history's greatest teachers of freedom. Seneca navigated the treacherous politics of imperial Rome. Yet each found within themselves an inner citadel, a place of calm that external storms couldn't touch. Tonight, you're invited into that same sanctuary, not through escape from reality, but through a fundamental shift in how you relate to it. The Stoics didn't promise a life without problems. They offered something far more valuable, the tools to remain unbroken regardless of what life brings. They understood that while we cannot control what happens to us, we retain absolute authority over how we respond. This simple recognition transforms everything. Consider for a moment the weight you're carrying right now. Perhaps it's worry about tomorrow's challenges, regret over today's mistakes, or the persistent anxiety that seems to follow you wherever you go. The Stoics would tell you that much of this burden is self-imposed. Not because your concerns aren't valid, but because you're trying to control things that exist beyond your influence while neglecting the one thing you can actually govern: your own mind, your own responses, your own inner state. This doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. The Stoic path isn't about emotional numbness, it's about emotional wisdom. It's learning to feel deeply without being controlled by those feelings, to care passionately without being destroyed by outcomes you cannot guarantee. It's discovering that your peace doesn't depend on external circumstances aligning perfectly with your desires. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. A traffic jam is just cars moving slowly until we decide it's a disaster ruining our day. A critical comment is just words until we choose to let it define our worth. A change in plans is just a shift in direction until we insist it's evidence that nothing ever goes right. The event remains the same, but our interpretation determines our experience. This insight offers profound freedom. If your distress comes not from what happens, but from how you think about what happens, then you have more power than you realized. You cannot control the traffic, the comment, or the changed plans. But you can question whether your interpretation serves you. You can choose a perspective that brings peace instead of agitation. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal late at night after long days of imperial duties, reminded himself repeatedly of life's transient nature. Everything passes, the good times, the difficult times, the moments of triumph, and the seasons of struggle. Nothing lasts forever, which means both that your current pain won't endure indefinitely, and that clinging desperately to what you have will only create suffering. This impermanence isn't something to fear, it's something to embrace. When you truly accept that everything changes, you stop wasting energy trying to make the temporary permanent. You begin to appreciate what you have while you have it, without the desperate grasping that turns joy into anxiety. You face challenges with greater equanimity because you know that they, too, shall pass. The Stoics practiced what they called the discipline of desire, learning to want what happens rather than happening what they want. This might sound like passive resignation, but it's actually a form of radical empowerment. When you stop fighting reality, you free up enormous energy to work skillfully with whatever arises. When you release the demand that life conform to your expectations, you discover flexibility and resilience you never knew you possessed. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, you're practicing this ancient art without even realizing it. Sleep itself is a form of letting go, a nightly surrender to forces beyond your conscious control. You cannot will yourself to sleep any more than you can will your heart to beat or your lungs to breathe. You can only create conditions that allow sleep to come naturally. This is perfect training for the Stoic way of living, doing what's in your power while trusting the process to unfold as it will. The bedroom becomes a temple, the bed an altar of surrender. Here, in the quiet darkness, you can practice releasing the day's struggles, not by denying they happened, but by accepting that they're now in the past, beyond your ability to change. What's done is done. What remains is what you'll do with the wisdom you've gained and the opportunities that tomorrow might bring. But even that tomorrow isn't your concern right now. The Stoics emphasize the importance of living in the present moment, the only time when life actually occurs. The past exists only in memory, the future only in imagination. Reality happens now. Peace is found now. Rest comes now. Your breath moves in and out now. Your heart beats steadily now. Your body lies supported by the bed now. This moment, this very instant, contains everything you need. As these words flow over you, notice how your breathing naturally deepens. Notice how your muscles begin to relax. Notice how the thoughts that seemed so urgent just minutes ago start to fade into the background. This is the wisdom of the body, which knows how to let go without any philosophy at all. The Stoics simply learned to let the mind follow the body's natural wisdom. Seneca wrote about the importance of examining each day before sleep, not with harsh judgment, but with honest reflection. What went well? What could have gone better? What did you learn? This isn't about self-criticism or perfectionism. It's about conscious living, about paying attention to your own growth and development. Tonight, instead of reviewing your failures, celebrate your efforts. Acknowledge that you made it through another day, faced whatever challenges arose, and survived to rest and begin again. The very fact that you're here, listening to these words, seeking wisdom and peace, shows that something within you refuses to give up. Something in you continues to reach toward the light even in darkness, continues to seek growth even in difficulty, continues to hope even when hope feels foolish. The Stoics would recognize this as your truest nature, the divine spark of reason and virtue that no external circumstance can extinguish. This inner flame doesn't depend on success or failure, praise or criticism, gain or loss. It burns steadily regardless of external weather. It's the part of you that can remain calm in the storm, compassionate in the face of cruelty, and wise even when surrounded by folly. Tonight, As you drift towards sleep, feel this flame burning quietly in your chest. Feel its warmth spreading through your body, its light illuminating your mind. The Stoics believed that philosophy wasn't just an intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a daily practice of becoming more fully human. Each challenge was an opportunity to practice virtue. Each difficulty was a chance to develop strength. Each moment of peace was a reminder of what was possible when the mind aligned itself with reality, rather than fighting against it. You're engaging in this practice right now, using ancient wisdom to find modern peace. Sleep will come when it comes. Your task isn't to force it, but to create the conditions that welcome it. Relax your body, quiet your mind, release your concerns about tomorrow. Trust that rest will find you when you stop chasing it so desperately. Trust that whatever tomorrow brings, you'll have the resources to meet it with dignity and grace. Trust that this moment, right now, is enough. The Stoic path isn't about perfection. It's about progress. It's about becoming slightly wiser, slightly stronger, slightly more peaceful with each passing day. Some days you'll succeed brilliantly, feeling like you've mastered these ancient teachings. Other days you'll struggle, wondering if you've learned anything at all. Both experiences are part of the journey. Both are worthy of compassion. Tonight, be gentle with yourself. Forgive yourself for whatever mistakes you made today. Acknowledge whatever progress you achieved, however small. Remember that every master was once a beginner. Every expert was once a novice. The Stoic sages whose wisdom guides you tonight were once students too, learning these lessons through trial and error, success and failure, just like you. As your eyelids grow heavy and your breathing slows, carry this knowledge into your dreams. You are stronger than you know, wiser than you believe, and more capable of peace than your worried mind would have you think. The same wisdom that guided Marcus Aurelius through the burdens of empire, that sustained Epictetus through slavery and freedom, that gave Seneca strength in both wealth and exile, flows through you now. You are part of an ancient tradition of human beings who chose wisdom over worry, virtue over vice, serenity over struggle. Let these truths settle deep into your unconscious mind as sleep approaches. Let them work their quiet magic as your conscious defenses lower and your heart opens to receive what it most needs. Tomorrow you can return to the challenges and complexities of modern life, but you'll return with something new, the growing understanding that your peace doesn't depend on controlling the uncontrollable, but on accepting what is while working wisely with what's possible. The night embraces you now. The darkness offers not emptiness, but richness, not void, but fullness. In this darkness, ancient wisdom takes root and grows. In this quiet, your soul remembers its true nature. In this rest, you prepare for whatever dawn may bring, knowing that you carry within yourself everything needed to meet it with grace. The wisdom of the ancient Stoics whispers to you now across the centuries, carrying messages that your soul recognizes as truth. These weren't men who lived in ivory towers, protected from life's harsh realities. They were warriors, slaves, emperors, and advisors who faced the same fundamental human struggles that you face tonight. Their words carry weight because they were forged in the crucible of real experience, tested against genuine hardship, and proven through lives lived with extraordinary courage and grace. Marcus Aurelius wrote his most profound insights not for publication, but for his own soul's guidance. Late at night, after days spent managing an empire, dealing with rebellions, plagues, and political intrigue, he would sit by candlelight and remind himself of what truly mattered. His personal journal, which we now call Meditations, wasn't meant for others to read. It was his private conversation with wisdom, his nightly practice of returning to center, his way of processing the overwhelming demands of leadership and life. Imagine him in those quiet moments, stripped of imperial robes and royal authority, sitting alone with his thoughts just as you sit now with yours. The external circumstances were vastly different, but the internal landscape was remarkably similar. The same questions that trouble you troubled him. How do we find peace when everything feels chaotic? How do we maintain dignity when others disappoint us? How do we stay strong when we feel overwhelmed? How do we sleep peacefully when tomorrow's challenges loom large? His answer was always the same: return to what you can control and release what you cannot. This simple principle, stated so easily yet so difficult to practice, became the foundation of his inner peace. Night after night, he would remind himself that his thoughts, his responses, his character, and his choices remained his own, regardless of what storms raged around him. External circumstances might challenge him, but they couldn't force him to abandon his principles or lose his essential self. You carry this same power tonight. The day may have brought unexpected challenges, difficult conversations, disappointing news, or simply the accumulated weight of ordinary stress. But here, in this moment, you retain the fundamental human capacity that the Stoics prized above all others: the ability to choose your response. You can choose how to interpret what happened. You can choose what lessons to draw from your experiences. You can choose what attitude to carry into tomorrow. This isn't about positive thinking or pretending problems don't exist. The Stoics were remarkably clear-eyed about life's difficulties. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about death, loss, betrayal, and suffering. Epictetus knew firsthand what it meant to have no control over external circumstances. Seneca experienced both great wealth and political exile. They didn't advocate denial or naive optimism. Instead, they developed a sophisticated understanding of how to navigate reality with wisdom and grace. The key insight that transformed their lives can transform yours. Most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our resistance to what happens to us. When we demand that reality be different from what it is, when we insist that people behave according to our expectations, when we require that our plans unfold exactly as we envision them, we set ourselves up for inevitable disappointment and frustration. But when we learn to work with reality as it is rather than as we wish it were, something remarkable happens. The energy we were spending on resistance becomes available for creative response. The emotional turmoil we were experiencing from fighting the unchangeable settles into calm acceptance. The stress we were carrying from trying to control the uncontrollable dissolves into peaceful surrender. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. The Stoics were among the most engaged and effective people in history. Marcus Aurelius governed wisely. Epictetus taught brilliantly. Seneca wrote prolifically. They accomplished great things precisely because they didn't waste energy fighting reality. Instead, they directed their considerable talents and efforts toward what they could actually influence: their own thoughts, words, and actions. Tonight, as you lie in the darkness listening to these words, you can practice this ancient art. Notice the thoughts that arise in your mind. Some will be helpful, offering insight or comfort. Others will be unhelpful, creating anxiety or regret about things you cannot change. You don't need to judge these thoughts or fight them. Simply observe them with the same detached interest you might watch clouds passing overhead. The Stoics understood that thoughts are like weather patterns in the mind. Sometimes the sky is clear and bright, sometimes storms blow through. Neither condition is permanent. The wise person doesn't try to control the weather, but learns to dress appropriately and find shelter when necessary. Similarly, you don't need to control your thoughts, but you can learn to respond to them skillfully. When a worrying thought arises about tomorrow's responsibilities, you can ask yourself, is this something I can act on right now? If the answer is yes, make a mental note to address it tomorrow and then let it go. If the answer is no, recognize that worrying about it serves no useful purpose and will only rob you of tonight's rest. Either way, the thought doesn't need to control your emotional state or dominate your consciousness. When regretful thoughts emerge about today's mistakes or missed opportunities, you can practice the Stoic discipline of turning every experience into education. What did you learn? How will you handle similar situations differently in the future? What character strengths can you develop as a result of this experience? Transform regret into wisdom, and the painful experience becomes a gift that serves your growth. This practice of mental discipline isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending everything is fine. The Stoics felt deeply and cared passionately about their values and relationships. Marcus Aurelius grieved the death of his children. Epictetus felt the sting of injustice. Seneca experienced the full range of human emotions, but they didn't let these emotions make their decisions for them or determine their fundamental peace of mind. There's a profound difference between feeling an emotion and being controlled by it. You can feel sad without becoming depression. You can feel angry without becoming rage. You can feel worried without becoming anxiety. The emotion arises, you acknowledge it, you learn from it, and then you choose how to respond based on your deeper wisdom rather than your immediate impulse. As you practice this kind of emotional wisdom, you begin to develop what the Stoics called equanimity, a steady, balanced state of mind that remains relatively stable regardless of external circumstances. This doesn't mean feeling nothing, but rather feeling everything without being overwhelmed by any single emotion. You become like a skilled ship captain who can navigate through storms and calm seas alike, always maintaining course toward your chosen destination. The destination, for the Stoics, was always the same: a life lived according to virtue. They identified 4 cardinal virtues that served as their guiding stars: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. Wisdom meant seeing reality clearly and making decisions based on truth rather than wishful thinking. Justice meant treating others fairly and contributing to the common good. Courage meant facing challenges without being paralyzed by fear. Temperance meant maintaining balance and avoiding extremes. These virtues aren't abstract ideals, but practical guidelines for daily living. Every situation offers an opportunity to practice one or more of them. A difficult conversation at work becomes a chance to practice courage and justice. A tempting indulgence becomes an opportunity to exercise temperance. A confusing problem becomes an invitation to seek wisdom. A person in need becomes a call to express compassion. Tonight, as sleep approaches, you can reflect on how you expressed these virtues today. Where did you act with wisdom? When did you show courage? How did you practice justice or temperance? This isn't about judging yourself harshly for falling short, but about recognizing the opportunities for growth that every day provides. Even your mistakes and failures become valuable if they teach you something about yourself and help you develop greater virtue. The Stoics believed that this kind of daily self-examination was essential for a well-lived life. Seneca wrote about ending each day by reviewing his actions, thoughts, and responses, not with self-condemnation, but with honest assessment and gentle guidance for improvement. Like a loving teacher helping a student learn, you can look at your day with both clarity and compassion. What moments today brought you joy? Hold on to those feelings and let them fill your heart with gratitude. What challenges did you face with dignity and grace? Acknowledge that strength and let it remind you of your resilience. What situations triggered reactions you wish you could change? Learn from those moments without drowning in regret, knowing that awareness is the first step toward growth. This practice of reflective self-examination naturally leads to what the Stoics considered the ultimate goal of philosophy: peace of mind. Not the peace that comes from having everything go your way, but the deeper peace that emerges when you align yourself with reality rather than fighting against it. This peace doesn't depend on external circumstances because it arises from internal harmony between your actions and your values. When you live according to your deepest principles, when you respond to challenges with virtue rather than reactivity, when you accept what you cannot change while working diligently on what you can influence, something settles in your soul. The constant low-level anxiety that characterizes so much of modern life begins to fade. The persistent sense that something is wrong or missing starts to dissolve. You discover that you already possess everything necessary for contentment. This doesn't mean life becomes easy or that problems disappear. The Stoics never promised a trouble-free existence. What they offered was something far more valuable. The tools to remain untroubled by troubles, the capacity to find meaning in suffering, the ability to maintain inner peace regardless of outer chaos. They discovered that happiness isn't about getting what you want, but about wanting what you get, not in a passive or resigned way, but with active appreciation for the opportunities that every situation provides. As these ideas settle into your consciousness, notice how your body responds. The tension you were carrying in your shoulders and jaw begins to release. Your breathing naturally deepens and slows. The mental chatter that was keeping you awake starts to quiet. This isn't just the effect of lying down or the lateness of the hour. It's your nervous system responding to the profound relief that comes when the mind stops fighting reality and starts working with it instead. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern neuroscience is just beginning to confirm. The way we think directly affects our physical well-being. Chronic stress, worry, and resistance to reality don't just make us emotionally miserable. They compromise our immune systems, disrupt our sleep, and accelerate aging. Conversely, practices that promote acceptance, gratitude, and present moment awareness have measurable positive effects on our physical health. But the Stoics weren't interested in these practices merely for their health benefits. They pursued wisdom and virtue as ends in themselves, recognizing that a life lived according to these principles is inherently more fulfilling and meaningful than one driven by the pursuit of pleasure or the avoidance of pain. They discovered that when you stop chasing happiness directly and instead focus on living with integrity and wisdom, happiness tends to arise naturally as a byproduct. Tonight, you don't need to achieve perfect Stoic wisdom or eliminate all anxiety from your mind. You simply need to take the next step in your own philosophical journey. Perhaps that step is practicing acceptance of one thing you cannot change. Maybe it's choosing a more generous interpretation of someone else's behavior. It might be releasing one worry that serves no useful purpose, or acknowledging one thing you're genuinely grateful for. Whatever step feels right for you in this moment, take it gently and without pressure. The Stoic path isn't about perfection, but about progress. It's about becoming slightly wiser, slightly more patient, slightly more accepting with each passing day. Some days you'll make great strides, feeling like you've finally grasped these ancient teachings. Other days you'll struggle, wondering if you're making any progress at all. Both experiences are part of the journey, and both deserve your compassion. The masters whose wisdom guides you tonight understood this perfectly. They wrote not as those who had achieved complete mastery, but as fellow travelers on the path of wisdom, sharing what they had learned from their own struggles and victories. Their words carry power precisely because they emerged from real human experience, from the same hopes and fears, challenges and aspirations that you face in your own life. As sleep draws nearer and your conscious mind begins to release its grip on the day's concerns, let these Stoic principles work their quiet magic in your subconscious. Let them remind you that you are stronger than your circumstances, wiser than your worries, and more capable of peace than your anxious thoughts would have you believe. Let them help you remember that tomorrow's challenges, whatever they may be, will be met by someone who has grown in wisdom and strength from facing today's difficulties with grace and courage. The darkness that surrounds you now isn't empty or threatening. It's full of potential, rich with possibilities for rest and renewal. In this darkness, the seeds of ancient wisdom take root and begin to grow. In this quiet, your soul remembers its true nature and its essential strength. In this peace, you prepare to meet whatever tomorrow may bring with the equanimity and grace of a true philosopher. The wisdom that flows through you now carries with it a particular kind of power, the power that comes from understanding the fundamental nature of control and surrender. As you rest here in the gentle embrace of night, your mind naturally begins to release the tight grip it has maintained all day on circumstances, people, and outcomes that were never truly yours to command. This letting go isn't defeat. It's the beginning of true strength. Epictetus, who knew more about powerlessness than perhaps any other philosopher, discovered a profound paradox in his years of bondage. Though his body was enslaved, though his external circumstances were controlled entirely by others, though he possessed no material wealth or social status, he found within himself an unassailable kingdom. In the realm of his own thoughts, judgments, and responses, he was absolutely free. No master could force him to hate. No chains could compel him to despair. No circumstance could make him abandon his dignity. This discovery transformed not only his own life, but the lives of countless students who came to learn from him after he gained his physical freedom. He taught them, and through his teachings he teaches you tonight, that the very thing we spend most of our energy trying to control, the external world, is precisely what lies beyond our influence. Meanwhile, the one thing we can absolutely govern, our inner world, is often the thing we neglect most completely. Think about how you spent your energy today. How much mental and emotional effort did you invest in trying to change other people's minds, control their reactions, or influence outcomes that depended on factors beyond your reach? How much anxiety did you experience about situations that might never occur? How much frustration did you feel when reality failed to conform to your expectations? How much peace did you sacrifice in the futile attempt to manage the unmanageable? Now consider how much attention you gave to the one area where your influence is complete and absolute, the quality of your own thoughts, the nature of your responses, the direction of your attention, the cultivation of your character. If you're like most people, the ratio is dramatically skewed toward the futile and away from the fruitful. This misallocation of energy is one of the primary sources of human suffering, and recognizing it is the beginning of liberation. The Stoic practice begins with a simple but revolutionary shift in focus. Instead of asking, "How can I make this situation turn out the way I want?" you learn to ask, "How can I respond to this situation in a way that aligns with my deepest values?" Instead of demanding, "Why won't other people see things my way?" you inquire, "What can I learn from this disagreement about myself and others?" Instead of insisting, "This shouldn't be happening to me," you wonder, "What opportunities for growth and character development does this challenge present?" This shift doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't require perfection to be beneficial. Even small movements in this direction create noticeable improvements in your sense of peace and effectiveness. When you stop wasting energy on the impossible and redirect it toward the possible, you discover reserves of strength and creativity you never knew you possessed. When you cease demanding that life conform to your preferences and start looking for ways to respond skillfully to whatever arises, you find yourself becoming more resilient and adaptable. The practice becomes especially powerful during times of transition between wakefulness and sleep. In these liminal moments, when the conscious mind's defenses are lowered and the deeper layers of the psyche become more accessible, insights can take root that transform your entire approach to living. The wisdom you're receiving now doesn't just inform your intellect, it reshapes your very being at levels beneath ordinary awareness. Marcus Aurelius understood this perfectly, which is why he made his philosophical practice primarily a nighttime activity. After the demands and distractions of imperial duties, When the palace grew quiet and he could finally turn his attention inward, he would engage in the kind of deep reflection that ultimately transformed him into one of history's wisest leaders. His private writings reveal a man constantly working to align his responses with his principles, consistently choosing virtue over convenience, regularly practicing the discipline of letting go. He wrote to himself about the futility of anger toward people who act according to their own understanding rather than his preferences. He reminded himself that others' opinions about him were beyond his control and therefore not worth his mental energy. He practiced accepting criticism without defensiveness and praise without pride, recognizing both as external events that couldn't touch his essential self unless he allowed them to do so. These weren't abstract philosophical exercises, but intensely practical training for a man who faced constant pressure, criticism, and challenges to his authority. Every day brought decisions that could affect millions of people, conflicts that had no clear resolution, and problems that seemed intractable. Yet his journal entries reveal someone who found profound peace by consistently returning to the fundamental Stoic principle. Focus on what you can control, accept what you cannot. You can practice this same discipline tonight, starting with the simplest possible application. Notice what thoughts arise as you prepare for sleep. Some will be helpful, offering insight or genuine problem-solving value. Others will be merely repetitive worry, pointless rumination about past events, or anxious speculation about future possibilities. You don't need to judge these thoughts or fight them, but you can learn to recognize the difference between productive thinking and mental noise. When you catch your mind recycling the same worry for the 5th or 10th time, you can gently remind yourself that additional repetition serves no useful purpose. The concern has been noted, filed away for appropriate action if needed, and now deserves to be released so that rest can come. When you find yourself replaying conversations or situations from earlier in the day, you can acknowledge what happened without needing to solve every problem or perfect every interaction in your imagination. This practice of mental housekeeping, of sorting thoughts into helpful and unhelpful categories, gradually trains your mind to spend less time in unproductive loops and more time in present moment awareness. You begin to develop what the Stoics called attention, the capacity to direct your mental energy consciously rather than allowing it to be pulled in random directions by every passing thought or emotion. Attention is perhaps the most valuable skill you can develop because it underlies all other capacities. When your attention is scattered, pulled constantly toward worries about the future or regrets about the past, you cannot fully engage with the opportunities and challenges of the present moment. When your attention is stable and directed, you can respond to situations with clarity and wisdom rather than reacting from habit or emotion. The bedroom becomes a perfect training ground for developing this skill because the external demands are minimal and the internal landscape becomes more visible. Here in the quiet darkness, you can observe the natural movement of your mind without the usual distractions. You can notice how thoughts arise and pass away like waves on the ocean, how emotions come and go like weather patterns in the sky, how the constant chatter of mental activity gradually settles into silence when you stop feeding it with your attention. This settling happens naturally when you truly let go of the need to control or solve everything before you sleep. Your nervous system recognizes the shift from effort to ease, from resistance to acceptance, from trying to allowing. The physical tension that accompanies mental struggle begins to dissolve. Your breathing deepens and slows. Your heartbeat becomes more regular and peaceful. Your entire being starts to align with the natural rhythms of rest and renewal. But the benefits extend far beyond better sleep, though that alone would be worthwhile. As you develop greater skill at distinguishing between what you can and cannot control, this wisdom begins to infuse every aspect of your life. You waste less energy on futile efforts and invest more in areas where your influence can make a genuine difference. You experience less frustration with other people because you stop expecting them to be different from who they are. You feel less anxiety about the future because you focus on preparing for possibilities rather than trying to guarantee specific outcomes. Relationships improve when you stop trying to control other people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and start focusing on being the kind of person you want to be, regardless of how others respond. Work becomes more fulfilling when you concentrate on doing excellent work rather than managing your reputation or controlling how others perceive your efforts. Even difficult circumstances become more bearable when you accept them as the reality within which you must operate, rather than as obstacles that shouldn't exist. This doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent. The Stoics were among the most engaged and effective people in their societies precisely because they didn't waste energy on what they couldn't control. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire. Epictetus taught students. Seneca wrote influential works and advised political leaders. They accomplished great things by focusing their considerable talents and efforts where they could make the most difference, in their own thoughts, words, and actions. The practice requires ongoing attention because the mind's habitual tendency is to drift toward what seems urgent rather than what is actually important. External events have a way of capturing our attention and convincing us that we must solve, fix, or control them immediately. The news media, social media, and even well-meaning friends and family members constantly present us with problems that feel critical but lie entirely outside our sphere of influence. Learning to recognize this dynamic and respond to it wisely is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. When you feel that familiar tug of anxiety about something happening in the wider world, you can pause and ask yourself, is this something I can take meaningful action on? If the answer is yes, you can make appropriate plans and then let go of worry. If the answer is no, you can send whatever positive thoughts or energy feel authentic and then redirect your attention toward areas where you can make a genuine difference. This practice extends to your personal relationships as well. When someone you care about is struggling, your natural impulse might be to try to fix their problems or change their perspective. But often the most loving thing you can do is to offer your presence and support while allowing them to find their own way through their challenges. You can control your own responses, your own availability, your own compassion, but you cannot control their choices or their growth process. The same principle applies to your own past and future. You cannot change what has already happened, no matter how much mental energy you invest in wishing things had gone differently. You cannot guarantee that your future will unfold according to your current plans, regardless of how much anxiety you experience about potential problems. But you can influence what you do with the lessons from your past, and you can take appropriate steps to prepare for various future possibilities. As you practice this fundamental Stoic discipline night after night, something remarkable begins to happen. The constant low-level stress that characterizes so much of modern life starts to diminish. The persistent sense that you're not doing enough, not achieving enough, not controlling enough, gradually fades. You discover that when you stop trying to manage everything, you become much more effective at managing the things that actually matter. This discovery often comes as a surprise because our culture teaches us that caring means worrying, that love requires anxiety, that responsibility demands constant vigilance over outcomes we cannot control. But the Stoics understood that true caring, authentic love, and genuine responsibility are actually incompatible with this kind of anxious control. When you truly care about someone or something, you want to show up fully present and capable rather than distracted by worry. When you truly love, you want to offer your best self rather than your most anxious self. When you take responsibility seriously, you focus on fulfilling your actual duties rather than taking on imaginary obligations. The peace that emerges from this practice isn't the absence of challenges or the guarantee of favorable outcomes. It's the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing you're living according to your highest values, regardless of external circumstances. It's the quiet confidence that arises when you stop seeking validation from others and start validating yourself through virtuous action. It's the profound rest that becomes possible when you finally stop fighting reality and start dancing with it instead. Tonight, as sleep approaches and your conscious control naturally loosens, you can practice this ultimate form of letting go. You can release not only the specific concerns and challenges of today, but the entire burden of trying to manage what cannot be managed. You can trust that tomorrow you'll have the wisdom to distinguish once again between what requires your attention and what deserves your release. You can rest in the knowledge that your peace doesn't depend on perfect circumstances, but on your commitment to respond to whatever arises with grace, courage, and wisdom. This trust isn't naive optimism, but mature wisdom. The recognition that you've successfully navigated every challenge life has presented so far, that you possess resources and resilience you may not even be aware of, and that the same wisdom traditions that have guided human beings through difficulties for thousands of years are available to guide you as well. The Stoic path doesn't promise an easy journey, but it offers the most reliable compass for navigating whatever terrain you encounter with dignity and peace. The compass that guides you through life's uncertain terrain points not toward external destinations, but toward an internal true north, the cultivation of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. These four cardinal virtues, recognized by Stoics as the foundation of human flourishing, aren't abstract ideals floating somewhere beyond reach. They're practical capacities that you can develop and express in every moment, including this very moment as you prepare for sleep. Wisdom begins with the recognition that most of what we think we know is actually assumption, projection, or inherited belief rather than direct understanding. The wise person approaches each situation with what Zen practitioners call beginner's mind, a willingness to see freshly rather than through the filters of past experience or future expectation. This doesn't mean abandoning what you've learned, but holding it lightly enough that new information can enter and old patterns can shift when they no longer serve. Tonight, as you lie here in the darkness, you can practice this quality of wisdom by observing your own mind without immediately judging or trying to change what you find. Notice how thoughts arise seemingly from nowhere, persist for a while, and then fade away to be replaced by new thoughts. Notice how emotions follow a similar pattern, appearing with various degrees of intensity before gradually dissolving back into the baseline of your being. Notice how even your sense of self, your identity, seems to shift subtly depending on which thoughts and emotions happen to be present. This observation isn't meant to create anxiety about the instability of your inner world, but rather to reveal something profound about the nature of human experience. The aspects of yourself that seem most solid and permanent are actually fluid and changing. The problems that feel overwhelming and eternal are actually temporary formations in the stream of consciousness, like whirlpools that appear dramatic and permanent from one perspective, but dissolve naturally when viewed from a broader vantage point. This understanding cultivates what the Stoics considered one of wisdom's most important qualities: perspective. When you recognize that your current concerns, however pressing they may feel, are part of a much larger pattern of arising and passing away, you can respond to them with appropriate seriousness without being overwhelmed by them. You can care about outcomes without being attached to them. You can work diligently toward your goals without defining your worth by whether you achieve them. The practice of justice flows naturally from this wisdom-informed perspective. When you recognize that other people are navigating the same fundamental human challenges that you face, dealing with their own fears and hopes and struggles, it becomes easier to extend compassion even when their behavior doesn't align with your preferences. When you understand that everyone is doing their best given their current level of understanding and the circumstances they're facing, criticism transforms into curiosity and judgment softens into empathy. Justice isn't just about treating others fairly, though that's certainly part of it. It's about recognizing the fundamental interconnectedness of human experience and choosing to contribute to the well-being of the whole rather than pursuing narrow self-interest. This broader understanding of justice includes being fair to yourself, neither harshly critical of your mistakes nor unrealistically demanding of perfection, but gently supportive of your ongoing growth and development. As you prepare for sleep, you can practice justice by forgiving yourself for whatever errors you made today and forgiving others for their imperfections as well. This forgiveness isn't condoning harmful behavior or pretending that mistakes don't matter, but rather releasing the resentment and self-criticism that serve no constructive purpose. When you carry grudges against others or harsh judgments against yourself into sleep, you poison your rest and diminish your capacity to respond skillfully to tomorrow's challenges. The cultivation of courage often requires confronting what you've been avoiding, but in the gentle context of nighttime reflection, this confrontation can be surprisingly peaceful. Physical courage gets most of the attention in our culture, the willingness to face external dangers or challenges. But the Stoics recognized that moral courage, the willingness to do what's right regardless of social pressure or personal cost, represents a higher form of bravery. And perhaps most demanding of all is what we might call existential courage. The willingness to face the fundamental uncertainties and limitations of human existence without retreating into denial or despair. Tonight you can practice this existential courage by acknowledging whatever fears or anxieties you've been carrying without immediately trying to solve them or push them away. What are you most worried about? What keeps you awake at night when you allow your mind to wander? What aspects of your life feel most uncertain or beyond your control? Rather than treating these concerns as problems to be eliminated, you can approach them as messengers, carrying important information about what matters most to you. Fear often points toward what you value. If you're anxious about a relationship, it may indicate how much that connection means to you. If you're worried about your health, it reflects your desire to live fully and well. If you're concerned about work or finances, it shows your commitment to security and contribution. When you recognize fear as information rather than enemy, you can learn from it without being paralyzed by it. This doesn't mean that all fears are rational or helpful. Some anxieties are based on unrealistic expectations or catastrophic thinking patterns that create suffering without providing useful guidance. But even these distorted fears can teach you something about your underlying values and concerns if you approach them with curiosity rather than resistance. The practice is to acknowledge what's present without being controlled by it, to feel what you're feeling without making decisions based solely on emotional impulses. Courage also manifests in the willingness to be vulnerable, to admit what you don't know, to ask for help when you need it, to show affection even when it might not be returned, to express your authentic self even when others might disapprove. These forms of courage are often more challenging than physical bravery because they require ongoing choice rather than momentary heroics. They ask you to live with an open heart in a world that often seems to reward defensiveness and emotional armor. The fourth cardinal virtue, temperance, provides the foundation that makes the other three possible. Without the ability to moderate your impulses, wisdom becomes merely intellectual knowledge, justice becomes self-righteous judgment, and courage becomes reckless aggression. Temperance is what allows you to respond thoughtfully, rather than react automatically, to choose your battles wisely, rather than fighting every perceived injustice, to care deeply without being consumed by attachment. In the context of preparing for sleep, temperance might mean knowing when to stop thinking and start resting, when to cease productive problem-solving, and begin restorative letting go. Your mind is capable of tremendous activity, but it also needs periods of quiet regeneration, just as your body needs sleep. The temperate approach to nighttime is to honor both your mind's natural tendency to process the day's experiences and its need for peaceful dormancy. This balance requires learning to distinguish between productive reflection and pointless rumination. Productive reflection helps you learn from experiences, integrate new information, and make better choices in the future. Pointless rumination repeats the same concerns without generating new insights, often increasing anxiety without improving understanding. The temperate mind notices when thinking has become repetitive and gently redirects attention toward rest. You can practice temperance right now by noticing if your mind is engaged in useful processing or stuck in unproductive loops. If you're genuinely learning something new about yourself or your situation, allow the thinking to continue naturally. If you're simply recycling familiar worries or criticisms, you can acknowledge these thoughts and then consciously choose to let them go. This isn't suppression or denial, but rather the mature recognition that some mental activities serve your well-being while others undermine it. The four virtues work together synergistically, each supporting and strengthening the others. Wisdom informs your understanding of what's truly important, making it easier to act with justice toward others and courage in the face of challenges. Justice connects you to something larger than your immediate personal concerns, providing motivation for wise and courageous action. Courage gives you strength to act on your wisdom and justice, even when it's difficult. Temperance helps you express wisdom, justice, and courage in balanced, sustainable ways rather than extremes that create their own problems. As these virtues develop through practice, they create what the Stoics called the good life, not meaning a life of pleasure or ease, but a life of meaning and integrity. The good life isn't measured by external achievements or possessions, but by the quality of your character and the consistency with which you embody your highest values. It's available to anyone, regardless of circumstances, because it depends entirely on internal choices rather than external conditions. This understanding can be profoundly liberating, especially during times when external circumstances feel challenging or beyond your control. When you cannot change your situation, you can still choose how to respond to it. When you cannot control other people's behavior, you can still govern your own actions. When you cannot guarantee outcomes, you can still commit to processes that align with your values. The practice of virtue becomes especially powerful during transitions between wakefulness and sleep, because the usual barriers between conscious and unconscious awareness become more permeable. Insights that might be rejected by the rational mind during full alertness can take root more easily when consciousness is relaxed and receptive. The virtues you contemplate and commit to during these liminal moments have a way of integrating into your character at deeper levels than purely intellectual understanding can reach. Marcus Aurelius understood this perfectly, which is why so many of his most profound insights were recorded as nighttime reflections. In the quiet darkness, away from the demands and distractions of imperial duty, he could connect with the essential principles that guided his leadership and his life. His private writings reveal someone who used these transitional moments not just for rest, but for the deep work of character formation. You can follow his example tonight by identifying one virtue you want to strengthen and reflecting on how you might express it more fully in your daily life. If wisdom calls to you, consider where you might benefit from seeing more clearly or learning something new. If justice resonates, think about ways you could contribute more meaningfully to others' well-being. If courage feels relevant, acknowledge areas where you've been avoiding necessary risks or difficult conversations. If temperance appeals, notice patterns of excess or deficiency that could benefit from better balance. This isn't about setting impossible standards or judging yourself harshly for current limitations. The Stoic approach to virtue is developmental rather than perfectionist, focused on gradual improvement rather than immediate mastery. Every small step toward greater wisdom, justice, courage, or temperance contributes to your flourishing and creates positive ripple effects in your relationships and community. The beautiful paradox of virtue is that pursuing it for its own sake tends to create the very conditions that make life most satisfying. When you prioritize wisdom over cleverness, justice over advantage, courage over comfort, and temperance over indulgence, you naturally align yourself with patterns that promote both individual well-being and social harmony. You become the kind of person others trust and respect, the kind of person you yourself admire, the kind of person who can sleep peacefully, knowing that your actions reflected your deepest values. This alignment between your actions and values creates what the Stoics called integrity, not meaning moral perfection, but rather internal consistency between what you believe and how you live. When your behavior matches your principles, when your daily choices reflect your long-term commitments, when your relationships express your deepest caring, you experience a form of peace that doesn't depend on external validation or perfect circumstances. Tonight, as you settle into this peace, you can trust that the virtues you're contemplating will continue their quiet work even as you sleep. The seeds of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance that you plant in consciousness will grow in the fertile darkness of rest, emerging tomorrow as increased capacity for living with integrity and grace. You don't need to force this process or monitor its progress. You simply need to plant the seeds with sincere intention and trust in the natural processes of growth and development that operate beyond conscious control. The same power that transforms seeds into flowers, that heals wounds while you sleep, that processes memories and emotions during dreams, will integrate these virtue practices into the fabric of your being. You'll wake tomorrow not as a completely different person, but as someone slightly more aligned with your highest values, slightly more capable of responding to challenges with wisdom and grace, slightly more committed to contributing positively to the world around you. This gradual transformation is the essence of Stoic practice, not dramatic conversion experiences, but steady development of character through consistent daily choices. Each night offers an opportunity to reflect on your progress and recommit to the path. Each morning provides fresh chances to embody the virtues you've been cultivating. Each challenge becomes an occasion to practice what you've been learning. Each success becomes evidence of your growing capacity for excellent living. The evidence of your growing capacity becomes most apparent, not in moments of triumph, but in those ordinary instances when life presents its familiar challenges, and you find yourself responding with slightly more patience, wisdom, or grace than you might have mustered before. These subtle shifts in your habitual reactions are the true markers of philosophical progress, more meaningful than any external achievement, because they represent genuine transformation at the level of character. Seneca wrote extensively about this kind of incremental development, describing how philosophical practice works like water, gradually wearing smooth the rough edges of a stone. The changes happen so slowly as to be nearly imperceptible day to day, yet over time they create profound differences in how you experience life and how you show up in your relationships. This understanding can be particularly comforting during periods when growth feels stagnant or when old patterns seem stubbornly persistent. Tonight, as you rest in this liminal space between wakefulness and sleep, you can reflect on the subtle progress you've made in recent weeks or months. Perhaps you've noticed yourself pausing before reacting to criticism, taking a breath before responding to frustration, or choosing kindness in situations where you might previously have chosen defensiveness. These small victories may seem insignificant compared to dramatic life changes, yet they represent the most authentic form of human development. The Stoics understood that lasting change occurs not through force or sudden revelation, but through the patient cultivation of new habits of thought and response. Just as your body builds strength through consistent exercise rather than sporadic intense effort, your character develops through regular practice of virtue rather than occasional heroic gestures. This perspective can relieve the pressure many people feel to transform their entire lives overnight, and instead invite them into the more sustainable path of gradual, consistent improvement. One of the most profound shifts that occurs through Stoic practice is the gradual movement away from external validation as the primary source of self-worth toward internal validation based on the alignment between your actions and your values. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent to others' opinions or feedback, but rather developing a stable core sense of value that doesn't fluctuate dramatically based on external circumstances or others' approval. When your primary reference point becomes your own integrity rather than others' judgments, something remarkable happens to your relationship with both success and failure. Success becomes an opportunity to practice humility and gratitude rather than a source of pride or superiority. Failure becomes a teacher offering lessons about areas for growth rather than evidence of personal inadequacy. Both experiences become valuable parts of your development rather than measures of your fundamental worth. This internal orientation requires ongoing practice because the world constantly invites you to derive your sense of value from external sources. Social media algorithms are designed to trigger comparison and competition. Workplace cultures often reward performance metrics over character development. Consumer marketing consistently suggests that happiness comes through acquisition rather than cultivation of virtue. Swimming against these cultural currents requires conscious, deliberate effort. The nighttime hours offer a perfect opportunity to strengthen your internal compass away from these external influences. In the quiet privacy of your own consciousness, you can reconnect with what genuinely matters to you beyond social expectations or cultural pressures. You can ask yourself questions that help clarify your authentic values and commitments. What kind of person do I want to be when nobody is watching? What principles do I want to guide my decisions, regardless of what others might think? How do I want to treat people even when they can't reciprocate? These questions don't have easy answers, and your responses may evolve as you grow and mature. The value lies not in finding perfect answers, but in regularly engaging with these fundamental inquiries about meaning and purpose. The very act of reflection strengthens your capacity for self-awareness and intentional living, gradually building the internal foundation that allows you to respond to life's challenges from a place of centered strength rather than reactive habit. As this foundation develops, you may notice increased tolerance for uncertainty and ambiguity. The Stoics recognized that much of human suffering comes from the desire for certainty in an inherently uncertain world, the need to know outcomes before taking action, the craving for guarantees that life simply cannot provide. Learning to act skillfully despite uncertainty, to make decisions based on your best understanding while remaining open to new information, represents a crucial aspect of mature wisdom. This tolerance for uncertainty becomes especially important when dealing with other people, who remain fundamentally mysterious no matter how well you think you know them. Everyone carries private struggles, hidden fears, and complex motivations that you may never fully understand. The wise response is to treat others with compassion and respect while remaining unattached to specific outcomes from your interactions with them. You cannot control whether your kindness will be received gracefully, whether your efforts will be appreciated, whether your love will be returned in the form you might prefer. You can only control the quality of kindness, effort, and love that you offer. This understanding can be initially disappointing for those who hope that good behavior will be rewarded with predictable positive responses, but it ultimately becomes liberating when you realize that your peace doesn't depend on others' reactions. The practice of offering your best, regardless of whether it's reciprocated or acknowledged, connects to what the Stoics considered one of the highest forms of human excellence: acting in accordance with your nature as a rational social being without expecting specific rewards or recognition. This doesn't mean being naive about human nature or failing to establish appropriate boundaries, but rather maintaining your commitment to virtue even when virtue isn't socially rewarded or personally convenient. This commitment becomes a source of profound self-respect and inner peace. When you know that you've acted with integrity regardless of outcomes, when you've offered your genuine care regardless of whether it was returned, when you've spoken truth regardless of whether it was welcomed, you can rest easy knowing that you fulfilled your part of the human contract. What others do with your offerings becomes their responsibility rather than your concern. As you practice this kind of principled action over time, you may notice an unexpected side effect: increased emotional resilience. When your sense of self isn't dependent on others' responses or external validation, disappointments sting less acutely and rejections feel less personal. You develop what psychologists call emotional regulation, and what the Stoics simply considered the natural result of living according to reason rather than being driven by passion. This emotional resilience doesn't mean becoming cold or indifferent. If anything, it allows for deeper feeling, because you're not constantly protecting yourself from potential hurt. When you know that your fundamental well-being doesn't depend on any particular relationship or outcome, you can engage more freely and authentically. You can love without the desperate need to be loved back, contribute without requiring recognition, care without demanding specific responses. The freedom that comes from this kind of emotional independence is difficult to describe to those who haven't experienced it, but it represents one of the most valuable fruits of Stoic practice. It's the freedom to be yourself without apology, to express your values without fear, to engage with life fully without being paralyzed by the possibility of loss or disappointment. It's the freedom that comes from knowing that whatever happens, you have the resources to respond with dignity and grace. This freedom becomes most apparent during difficult times, when your usual sources of comfort or validation might be unavailable. When you're facing illness, loss, conflict, or major life transitions, external supports may feel inadequate or unreliable. But if you've developed a strong internal foundation through regular practice of virtue and self-reflection, you discover that you carry within yourself everything necessary to navigate even the most challenging circumstances. The Stoics didn't promise that philosophical practice would eliminate difficulties from life, but they demonstrated that it could transform your relationship to those difficulties. Pain becomes bearable when you stop resisting it and start looking for what it might teach you. Loss becomes meaningful when you use it as a reminder to appreciate what remains. Conflict becomes an opportunity to practice patience and understanding when you stop taking others' behavior personally. These transformations don't happen automatically or immediately. They require patience with yourself and commitment to the practices that cultivate wisdom over time. But the alternative, remaining at the mercy of external circumstances and others' choices, ultimately creates far more suffering than the effort required for philosophical development. The question isn't whether you'll experience challenges in life, but whether you'll meet those challenges as a victim or as a student. Tonight, as you prepare to surrender conscious control and trust in the restorative power of sleep, you can reflect on which role feels more appealing. The victim stance offers the temporary satisfaction of blame and resentment, but ultimately keeps you stuck in patterns of suffering. The student stance requires more responsibility and effort, but opens possibilities for growth and transformation that extend far beyond your current circumstances. The choice between these perspectives is one that you make moment by moment, day by day, decision by decision. Sometimes you'll choose wisely, responding to challenges with curiosity and openness. Sometimes you'll fall into old patterns of reactivity and blame. Both responses are human and forgivable. The practice is simply to notice the difference and gently guide yourself back toward the perspective that serves your long-term flourishing. This gentle guidance works better than harsh self-criticism or demanding perfection. The Stoics recognize that lasting change occurs through compassionate persistence rather than forceful effort. When you notice yourself falling into unproductive patterns, the skillful response is to acknowledge what happened without judgment and recommit to your practices rather than berating yourself for falling short of your ideals. This self-compassion paradoxically accelerates growth because it removes the additional layer of suffering that comes from harsh self-judgment. When you make a mistake and then criticize yourself harshly for making it, you're essentially making two mistakes: the original error and the self-attack that follows. When you learn to respond to mistakes with understanding and gentle correction, you eliminate the second mistake and create conditions that make learning from the first one more likely. As you develop this kinder relationship with yourself, you naturally extend more compassion to others as well. When you stop demanding perfection from yourself, you become less critical of others' imperfections. When you learn to forgive your own mistakes, you find it easier to forgive others when they fall short of your expectations. This creates positive cycles in your relationships and contributes to the overall harmony of your social environment. The ripple effects of personal philosophical practice extend far beyond individual well-being. When you become more peaceful, patient, and wise, everyone around you benefits from your presence. Your family experiences less conflict. Your co-workers encounter more collaboration. Your community receives more contribution. You become part of the solution to humanity's collective challenges rather than adding to the problems through reactive or unconscious behavior. This broader perspective can provide additional motivation for continuing your practices even when the personal benefits aren't immediately obvious. On days when philosophical reflection feels pointless or virtue seems unrewarded, you can remember that your commitment to wisdom and integrity contributes to something larger than your individual life. You're participating in the ancient human project of learning to live together with greater harmony and mutual support. The Stoics believed that human beings are naturally social creatures designed to work together for common flourishing. When you act in accordance with this design, honoring both your individual development and your responsibilities to others, you experience a form of satisfaction that purely selfish pursuits cannot provide. You discover that meaning comes not from getting what you want, but from contributing to what matters, not from being served, but from serving, not from being understood, but from understanding. This discovery often comes as a surprise to those who have spent years focused primarily on personal achievement or acquisition. The shift from a taking orientation to a giving orientation, from concern with getting to concern with contributing, from focus on receiving to focus on offering, creates unexpected fulfillment and peace. It's as if you've been trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom and suddenly discover that the bucket was meant to be a fountain all along. Tonight, as consciousness naturally transitions toward the restorative state of sleep, you can rest in this understanding of your true nature as both an individual deserving of care and a social being designed to contribute to collective well-being. You don't need to choose between self-care and service to others, because authentic self-care includes developing the character that makes you capable of genuine service, and authentic service includes taking good care of yourself so that you have resources to offer. This integration of personal and social responsibility creates the foundation for what the Stoics called the good life, a life that benefits both yourself and others through the consistent practice of wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. It's a life available to anyone regardless of circumstances because it depends on choices you can make rather than conditions you must arrange. It's the life that begins whenever you decide to embrace it, starting with this very moment of conscious reflection and commitment. The moment of commitment you're experiencing right now, this quiet decision to embrace wisdom as a guiding principle in your life, connects you to a lineage of seekers that stretches back through millennia. In choosing reflection over reaction, principle over convenience, growth over comfort, you join the ranks of those who have discovered that the most meaningful victories are won in the private battles with your own limitations, fears, and unconscious patterns. This lineage isn't exclusive or elite. It includes emperors and slaves, wealthy merchants and simple farmers, brilliant intellectuals and practical craftspeople. What unites them isn't their circumstances, but their commitment to living consciously, to taking responsibility for their character development, to contributing positively to the human community. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire, while Epictetus taught students after years of bondage, yet both practiced the same fundamental principles of philosophical living. Their examples demonstrate that Stoic wisdom adapts to any circumstances because it focuses on what remains constant across all situations: the capacity for rational reflection, ethical choice, and virtuous action. Whether you're facing abundance or scarcity, health or illness, success or failure, approval or criticism, the same inner resources remain available. The same practices that brought peace to ancient philosophers can bring peace to your contemporary challenges. This universality of wisdom becomes especially apparent when you recognize that the fundamental human dilemmas haven't changed much despite technological and social progress. People still struggle with fear and anxiety, still wrestle with relationships and responsibilities, still grapple with questions of meaning and purpose. The external circumstances have evolved dramatically, but the internal landscape remains remarkably consistent across centuries and cultures. What this means for your practice is that you're not trying to solve uniquely modern problems that require entirely new solutions. You're working with the same basic human condition that thoughtful people have always faced, which means you can learn from their successes and failures rather than having to figure everything out from scratch. The wisdom of the ages is available to guide your contemporary choices if you're willing to translate ancient insights into modern applications. This translation process requires discernment because not every aspect of ancient philosophy applies directly to current circumstances. The Stoics lived in a world with different social structures, economic systems, and technological capabilities. But the core insights about human nature, virtue ethics, and the path to flourishing remain remarkably relevant. The challenge is to extract the essential principles while adapting their expression to your specific context and opportunities. One principle that translates perfectly across all contexts is the importance of daily practice rather than sporadic, intense effort. The Stoics understood that character development happens through consistent small choices rather than occasional dramatic gestures. Just as physical fitness requires regular exercise rather than periodic marathons, psychological and spiritual well-being require daily attention to your thoughts, responses, and choices. This daily practice doesn't need to be elaborate or time-consuming to be effective. Even a few minutes of reflection before sleep, like what you're experiencing now, can create significant changes over time. The key is consistency rather than intensity, showing up regularly rather than perfectly. Your commitment to growth matters more than your current level of achievement. Your willingness to keep learning matters more than how much you already know. As you establish this rhythm of regular reflection, you may notice that your capacity for self-awareness gradually increases. You begin to catch yourself in old patterns more quickly, to recognize triggers before they provoke automatic reactions, to choose responses rather than simply having reactions. This increased awareness creates space between stimulus and response, the space that Viktor Frankl identified as the location of human freedom. In that space, you can ask questions that transform your experience. How do I want to respond to this situation? What would my best self do in these circumstances? How can I act in a way that I'll respect when I look back on this moment? What response would contribute most to my long-term flourishing and the well-being of others? These questions shift you from reactive mode to responsive mode, from being driven by unconscious patterns to making conscious choices. The practice of conscious choice-making extends to areas of life you might not initially consider philosophical territory. How you eat, how you spend money, how you use your time, how you treat your body, how you engage with entertainment and media, all become opportunities to practice virtue or reinforce unconscious patterns. The Stoics recognize that wisdom shows up in mundane decisions as much as in dramatic moments. This integration of philosophy into daily life prevents the common problem of compartmentalization, where people have high ideals that they apply only to certain areas while remaining unconscious in others. True philosophical living means bringing the same principles of reflection, intentionality, and virtue to all aspects of your experience rather than reserving them for special occasions or crisis moments. The gradual integration of these principles creates what the Stoics called consistency, not meaning rigid adherence to rules, but rather harmony between your deepest values and your actual behavior. When your actions align with your principles across different contexts and relationships, you experience a form of integrity that brings profound peace. There's no internal conflict between who you think you are and how you actually live, no exhausting gap between your public persona and your private reality. This consistency becomes especially important during challenging periods when external pressures might tempt you to abandon your principles for short-term advantage. The person who has been practicing virtue during calm times has developed the strength to maintain virtue during storms. The person who has been honest in small matters finds it easier to remain honest when the stakes are higher. Character is built in ordinary moments and revealed in extraordinary ones. Marcus Aurelius faced this test repeatedly during his reign, when the pressures of empire management could have justified almost any compromise with his philosophical principles. Yet his private writings reveal someone who consistently returned to virtue as his guide regardless of political pressures or expedient alternatives. His example demonstrates that it's possible to maintain integrity even in complex, morally ambiguous situations where perfect solutions aren't available. Your own tests may be less dramatic but no less significant for your character development. How you respond to criticism, handle disappointment, treat people who can't reciprocate, deal with inconvenience, and manage your own emotions all reveal the depth of your philosophical development. These everyday challenges are where philosophy proves its practical value or reveals itself as merely intellectual exercise. The beauty of Stoic practice is that every challenge becomes an opportunity to strengthen virtue rather than just an obstacle to overcome. Difficult people become teachers of patience and understanding. Frustrating situations become training grounds for acceptance and adaptability. Disappointing outcomes become lessons in detachment and resilience. From this perspective, problems transform from sources of suffering into curriculum for wisdom. This reframing doesn't eliminate the natural human responses of frustration, sadness, or anxiety, but it provides a broader context that prevents these emotions from becoming overwhelming or defining your entire experience. You can feel disappointed about an outcome while simultaneously appreciating what the experience taught you. You can grieve a loss while remaining grateful for what you gained from the relationship. You can acknowledge fear while choosing to act courageously despite it. The capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously represents a sophisticated level of psychological development that the Stoics cultivated through their practices. Rather than seeing life in black and white terms, good or bad, success or failure, they learned to appreciate the complexity and nuance of human experience. This nuanced perspective prevents the kind of all-or-nothing thinking that creates unnecessary suffering and poor decision-making. As you develop this capacity for holding paradox and complexity, your relationships with others tend to improve because you become less likely to categorize people as entirely good or bad based on their behavior in specific situations. You recognize that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, wisdom and blind spots, generous impulses and selfish tendencies. This recognition allows for more compassionate and realistic expectations of others while maintaining appropriate boundaries and standards. The practice of extending understanding to others naturally includes extending understanding to yourself as well. As you become more aware of your own contradictions and limitations, you develop greater compassion for the similar struggles that everyone faces. The harsh inner critic that may have dominated your self-talk gradually softens into a more supportive internal voice that encourages growth while accepting current limitations. This self-compassion isn't self-indulgence or excuse-making, but rather the recognition that beating yourself up for mistakes doesn't improve your performance or accelerate your growth. In fact, harsh self-criticism often creates the very conditions that make positive change more difficult by undermining confidence and creating defensive patterns. Gentle, honest self-assessment combined with commitment to improvement creates much better conditions for lasting development. The gentleness you learn to extend toward yourself becomes a resource you can offer to others as well. When you're not constantly battling your own imperfections, you have more emotional energy available for supporting others in their struggles. When you're not defending against your own mistakes, you can listen more openly to others' perspectives. When you're not demanding perfection from yourself, you can appreciate others' efforts even when their results fall short of ideal. This creates positive cycles in your relationships, where increased understanding leads to better communication leads to stronger connections, and stronger connections provide the foundation for mutual growth and support. The philosophical work you do on yourself inevitably benefits everyone around you by making you a more pleasant, patient, and helpful person to be with. The ripple effects extend even to people you encounter briefly or casually. The person who has been practicing virtue regularly tends to treat service workers with more respect, respond to frustrating situations with greater equanimity, and contribute to the overall emotional climate of their communities in positive ways. These small interactions may seem insignificant individually, but collectively they help create the kind of social environment where everyone can flourish more easily. This understanding of interconnection was central to Stoic philosophy, which viewed individual virtue not as an end in itself, but as a contribution to the common good. The wise person acts virtuously not only for personal satisfaction, but also because such action supports the welfare of the human community. This broader perspective provides additional motivation for maintaining your practices even when the personal benefits aren't immediately apparent. During periods when philosophical reflection feels pointless or virtue seems unrewarded, remembering this larger purpose can help sustain your commitment. You're not just working on your own character for selfish reasons, but contributing to the ancient human project of learning to live together with greater wisdom and harmony. Your efforts matter not only for your individual peace, but for the collective well-being of everyone whose life you touch. Tonight, as your conscious mind prepares to rest, and your unconscious processes take over the work of integration and restoration, you can feel satisfied knowing that your reflection has contributed both to your own development and to the larger human endeavor of conscious living. The insights you've received, the commitments you've made, the perspective you've cultivated will continue working below the threshold of awareness, gradually reshaping your habitual patterns and expanding your capacity for wisdom and virtue. This trust in unconscious processes reflects the Stoic understanding that much of the most important work of character development happens outside conscious control. Just as your body heals wounds and digests food without conscious direction, Your psyche integrates experiences and develops new capacities through processes that operate beyond direct mental management. Your task is to provide good raw material through conscious reflection and principled action. Then trust in the natural processes of growth and development. The sleep you're approaching isn't just rest from activity, but participation in the mysterious processes that transform experience into wisdom, challenge into strength, and intention into character. As you surrender conscious control and allow these natural processes to work, you're practicing one of the most fundamental Stoic principles, doing what's within your power while trusting what's beyond it. This balance between effort and surrender, responsibility and acceptance, action and rest, represents the dynamic equilibrium that characterizes wise living. In this equilibrium, you find the peace that the ancient philosophers sought and discovered, the peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances, but arises from internal harmony with the natural order of things. It's the peace of knowing you're living according to your deepest values, contributing to something larger than yourself, and growing in wisdom and virtue through every challenge and opportunity life presents. This peace accompanies you now into restorative sleep, and it will be there when you wake, ready to guide another day of conscious, virtuous living. The peace that will greet you upon waking carries within it a quality that distinguishes Stoic tranquility from mere temporary calm or emotional numbness. This is not the fragile peace that depends on favorable circumstances or the absence of challenges, but rather the robust serenity that emerges when you align yourself with reality instead of fighting against it. It's the peace that comes from understanding your place in the larger order of things and accepting both your power and your limitations with equal grace. This understanding develops gradually through what the Stoics called the discipline of assent, the practice of examining your initial reactions to events and choosing your responses consciously rather than automatically. When something happens that triggers frustration, disappointment, or anxiety, instead of immediately accepting those emotional reactions as accurate assessments of the situation, you learn to pause and ask, is this interpretation helping me respond skillfully? Is this judgment based on what actually happened or on my expectations about what should have happened? Is this perspective opening possibilities or closing them off? The discipline of assent requires recognizing that your first reaction to any event is not the event itself, but your interpretation of the event. Between what happens and how you feel about what happens lies a moment of choice that most people never notice. In that moment, you can choose perspectives that promote wisdom and virtue, or perspectives that increase suffering and confusion. The Stoics devoted considerable attention to training this capacity because they understood it as the key to human freedom. This training becomes particularly important when dealing with other people's behavior, which represents one of the most common sources of frustration and disappointment in human life. When someone acts in ways that seem inconsiderate, irrational, or harmful, your immediate reaction might be anger, judgment, or the desire to change their behavior. But the Stoic response begins with recognizing that other people's actions emerge from their own understanding, circumstances, and limitations, just as your actions emerge from yours. This doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or failing to establish appropriate boundaries, but rather responding to others from a place of understanding rather than reactive emotion. When you recognize that everyone is doing their best given their current level of wisdom and the pressures they're facing, criticism transforms into curiosity, judgment softens into compassion, and the urge to control others gives way to focus on your own responses. Marcus Aurelius practiced this perspective regularly in his dealings with difficult senators, rebellious generals, and incompetent administrators. Rather than wasting energy on anger or frustration with their limitations, he focused on how to respond effectively while maintaining his own integrity and emotional equilibrium. His private writings reveal someone who consistently chose understanding over indignation, strategic action over reactive blame. You can apply this same approach to your own challenging relationships, whether with family members who seem stuck in destructive patterns, colleagues who don't share your work ethic, or friends who make choices you find concerning. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to change them or suffering from disappointment when they don't meet your expectations, you can focus on how to interact with them skillfully while maintaining your own peace and principles. This shift from trying to control others to managing your own responses creates space for genuine influence to emerge. When you stop trying to force people to change and start modeling the qualities you value, you often discover that your example has more impact than your arguments ever did. When you respond to difficult behavior with patience and understanding, rather than matching their energy with reactivity, you create opportunities for more constructive interactions. The practice extends beyond individual relationships to your engagement with larger social and political realities that may seem troubling or frustrating. The news cycle, social media discussions, and cultural debates can trigger the same reactive patterns that difficult personal relationships provoke. The Stoic approach is to stay informed enough to fulfill your civic responsibilities while avoiding the kind of obsessive engagement that creates anxiety without producing constructive action. This balance requires distinguishing between what you can meaningfully influence through your actions and what lies beyond your sphere of control. You can vote, volunteer, donate to causes you support, treat people with respect and kindness, and model the values you want to see more of in the world. You cannot control election outcomes, shift cultural trends overnight, or force society to adopt your preferred policies and priorities. When you focus your energy on the areas where you can make genuine contributions, while accepting that larger outcomes depend on factors beyond your individual influence, you avoid the helplessness and overwhelm that characterize so much contemporary discourse. You become part of the solution through your actions, rather than adding to the problem through reactive emotions or cynical withdrawal from civic engagement. This principled engagement with social realities reflects the Stoic understanding that individual virtue and collective well-being are intimately connected. You cannot pursue your own development in isolation from the community that shapes and sustains you, nor can you contribute effectively to social progress without first developing the character qualities that make such contributions possible. The inner work and the outer work support each other in an ongoing cycle of personal and social development. As you cultivate this integrated approach to living, you may notice that the artificial boundaries between self-care and service to others begin to dissolve. Taking care of your physical health, mental clarity, and emotional well-being becomes not just personal maintenance, but preparation for more effective service. Developing patience, wisdom, and compassion becomes not just character building, but equipment for more skillful relationships and social contributions. This integration creates what the Stoics called sympatheia, a recognition of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things that leads naturally to both self-respect and concern for others. When you understand that your well-being and others' well-being are ultimately inseparable, caring for yourself becomes a form of caring for others, and caring for others becomes a form of caring for yourself. The apparent tension between selfishness and selflessness resolves into a more sophisticated understanding of interdependence. This understanding can be particularly healing for people who have struggled with guilt about self-care or exhaustion from excessive caretaking of others. The Stoic perspective suggests that both extremes miss the mark by failing to recognize the genuine relationship between individual and collective flourishing. Authentic self-care includes developing the capacity to contribute meaningfully to others' well-being, while authentic service includes maintaining yourself in condition to serve effectively over time. The practical implications of this integrated approach show up in countless daily decisions about how to allocate your time, energy, and attention. Instead of choosing between exercise and family time, you recognize that taking care of your health makes you a better family member. Instead of choosing between personal growth and professional responsibilities, you understand that developing wisdom and emotional regulation makes you more effective at work. Instead of choosing between rest and service, you appreciate that adequate rest is essential for sustained contribution. This both-and approach, rather than either-or thinking, represents a mature level of psychological development that the Stoics cultivated through their practices. Life rarely presents pure choices between good and evil, right and wrong, but rather complex situations requiring nuanced responses that honor multiple valid concerns simultaneously. Learning to navigate this complexity with wisdom and grace is one of the most valuable skills philosophy can teach. The capacity for holding multiple perspectives becomes especially important when facing difficult decisions where every option involves some degree of loss or compromise. Career changes that offer growth opportunities but require leaving comfortable situations. Relationship decisions that involve choosing between competing loyalties or values. Financial choices that require balancing security with generosity or present enjoyment with future stability. In these situations, the Stoic approach is not to seek perfect solutions that eliminate all downsides, but rather to make decisions based on your deepest values, while accepting that every choice involves trade-offs. You can acknowledge what you're giving up while committing fully to what you've chosen. You can grieve losses while appreciating gains. You can feel uncertainty while acting with confidence based on your best current understanding. This mature approach to decision-making reduces the paralysis that often accompanies complex choices and the regret that frequently follows difficult decisions. When you recognize that perfect choices don't exist and that some degree of loss is inevitable in any significant decision, you can focus on making choices that align with your values rather than trying to avoid all negative consequences. The peace that comes from this acceptance of life's inherent complexity and uncertainty is different from the peace that people often seek through trying to control outcomes or avoid difficult choices. It's the peace of someone who has learned to dance with uncertainty rather than fighting against it, who has developed confidence in their ability to respond skillfully to whatever emerges rather than needing to know in advance exactly what will happen. This confidence doesn't come from believing that you'll always make perfect choices or that everything will work out according to your preferences. It comes from knowing that you have the internal resources to learn from mistakes, adapt to changing circumstances, and maintain your integrity regardless of external outcomes. It's confidence in your capacity for growth rather than confidence in your current level of perfection. As you rest in this confidence tonight, you can feel your nervous system settling into the deep relaxation that comes when the mind stops trying to solve every problem and control every outcome. Your body recognizes the shift from effortful striving to peaceful allowing, from anxious planning to trustful presence. The tension that accumulates from fighting reality begins to dissolve as you align yourself with what is rather than demanding what should be. This alignment doesn't mean becoming passive or indifferent to improving your circumstances when improvement is possible. The Stoics were among the most engaged and effective people of their time precisely because they didn't waste energy fighting unchangeable realities. Instead, they directed their considerable talents toward areas where they could make genuine differences while accepting limitations that constrained their options. You can follow their example by continuing to work toward your goals and values while releasing attachment to specific timelines or exact outcomes. You can care deeply about results while finding satisfaction in the process itself. You can hope for the best while preparing to respond skillfully to whatever actually occurs. This balanced approach maximizes both your effectiveness and your peace of mind. The balance between engagement and detachment, effort and acceptance, caring and letting go represents the dynamic equilibrium that characterizes wise living. Like a skilled surfer who uses the wave's power while maintaining balance and direction, you learn to work with life's energies rather than against them, to find stability within change rather than seeking stability through control. This skill develops through practice rather than through understanding alone. Reading about balance doesn't create balance any more than reading about swimming creates the ability to swim. The actual capacity develops through repeatedly choosing the middle way between extremes, consistently practicing both commitment and flexibility, regularly exercising both responsibility and surrender. Tonight's reflection represents one instance of this practice, an opportunity to engage deeply with questions of meaning and purpose, while ultimately surrendering to the natural processes of rest and renewal. You've done the work of conscious consideration, and now you can trust the unconscious processes that integrate new insights and prepare you for tomorrow's challenges and opportunities. This trust in processes beyond conscious control reflects the Stoic understanding that human beings are part of a larger intelligence that operates through natural laws and patterns. Whether you conceive of this intelligence in religious terms as divine providence, in scientific terms as the laws of physics and evolution, or in philosophical terms as the rational structure of reality, the practical implication is the same. You can cooperate with this intelligence rather than fighting against it. Cooperation doesn't mean fatalistic acceptance of everything that happens, but rather skillful response to circumstances within the context of natural limitations and possibilities. A farmer cooperates with natural processes by planting appropriate crops at suitable times and caring for them properly, while accepting that weather, pests, and other factors beyond control will influence the outcome. Similarly, you can plant seeds of virtue and wisdom through your daily choices, while accepting that the harvest depends on factors beyond your direct management. This agricultural metaphor was common among Stoic writers because it captures perfectly the relationship between human effort and natural processes that characterizes philosophical living. You have important work to do in preparing soil, planting seeds, and tending growth, but the actual sprouting and flowering happen through forces beyond your conscious direction. Your task is to do your part well, while trusting the larger process to produce its own results in its own timing. As sleep approaches and conscious effort naturally gives way to unconscious restoration, you embody this fundamental pattern of cooperation with natural rhythms. The wisdom you've cultivated through reflection will continue working below the threshold of awareness, gradually reshaping your habitual patterns and expanding your capacity for virtue. Tomorrow you'll wake not as someone who has solved every problem, but as someone slightly more equipped to meet whatever challenges and opportunities arise with grace, courage, and wisdom. The equipment you'll carry into tomorrow has been forged through countless small decisions, moments of choosing patience over reactivity, understanding over judgment, courage over comfort. This equipment isn't visible to external observers, doesn't appear on any resume or social media profile, yet it represents the most valuable preparation you could possibly have for whatever life presents. It's the invisible armor of character that protects not by deflecting challenges, but by enabling you to meet them with dignity and grace. This inner equipment grows stronger not through dramatic gestures or peak experiences, but through the accumulated weight of ordinary moments when you choose virtue over convenience. The decision to listen fully when someone is speaking instead of planning what you'll say next. The choice to respond thoughtfully to criticism rather than defending immediately. The practice of acknowledging your mistakes quickly rather than making excuses. These seemingly small choices build the character that reveals itself in moments of genuine testing. Epictetus understood this perfectly, having learned through his own experience that external circumstances cannot determine your essential response to life. Born into slavery, physically disabled, denied the freedoms that most people take for granted, he could have reasonably concluded that philosophical development was a luxury reserved for those with better circumstances. Instead, he discovered that the most important human capacities, the ones that actually determine the quality of your experience, develop through internal choices that remain available regardless of external constraints. His teachings emphasize that you always retain the fundamental human capacity to choose your attitude toward whatever situation you find yourself in. This isn't positive thinking or denial of difficult realities, but rather the mature recognition that your interpretation of events significantly influences your experience of them. Two people can face identical circumstances and have dramatically different experiences based entirely on the perspectives they bring to those circumstances. This understanding becomes especially powerful when applied to the inevitable losses and disappointments that characterize human life. The Stoics didn't promise that philosophical practice would eliminate suffering, but they demonstrated that it could transform suffering from meaningless torment into meaningful education. When you approach difficulties as opportunities for character development rather than as evidence that something has gone wrong, even painful experiences contribute to your flourishing rather than detracting from it. The transformation doesn't eliminate the natural human responses of sadness, grief, or frustration when faced with genuine losses. These emotions serve important functions and shouldn't be suppressed or denied. But when you view challenges through the lens of character development, these difficult emotions become part of a larger process of growth rather than simply obstacles to happiness. You can feel sad about a loss while simultaneously appreciating what the relationship taught you. You can acknowledge disappointment about an outcome while recognizing the strength you developed through facing the challenge. This both an approach to difficult emotions represents a sophisticated level of psychological development that most people never achieve because they remain stuck in either-or thinking. They believe they must choose between feeling bad about painful experiences or pretending those experiences don't matter. The Stoic path offers a third alternative: feeling fully while learning deeply, grieving genuinely while growing consistently. The capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously becomes especially valuable when dealing with the complex moral landscape of real life, where pure choices between right and wrong are rare, and most decisions require balancing competing values and priorities. The parent who must choose between career advancement and family time. The employee who discovers organizational practices they find ethically questionable. The citizen who must weigh individual freedom against collective responsibility. In these situations, the Stoic approach is not to seek simple answers that eliminate all moral complexity, but rather to make decisions that best express your core values while accepting that perfect choices don't exist. You can acknowledge what you're sacrificing while committing fully to what you've chosen. You can feel the weight of difficult decisions while acting with clarity and conviction based on your best understanding of what virtue requires. This mature approach to moral decision-making develops through practice rather than through abstract reasoning alone. Every day presents opportunities to choose between easier and better options, between what serves your immediate interests and what aligns with your long-term values, between what others expect and what your conscience dictates. These daily choices, far more than occasional dramatic moral crises, shape your character and determine the kind of person you become. As you reflect on your own recent choices, you might notice patterns that reveal your current level of character development. Are you generally choosing short-term pleasure or long-term satisfaction? Do you typically respond to criticism with defensiveness or curiosity? When facing inconvenience or frustration, do you usually blame external circumstances or look for ways to respond more skillfully? These patterns provide honest feedback about areas where growth is still needed and areas where you've already made significant progress. The honest self-assessment that this kind of reflection requires can be challenging because it involves acknowledging areas where your behavior falls short of your ideals. But this acknowledgement is the beginning of genuine improvement rather than the end of your philosophical development. The Stoics were remarkably honest about their own imperfections because they understood that denying weaknesses prevents growth, while acknowledging them creates possibilities for positive change. Seneca's letters reveal someone who struggled with the same temptations and challenges that everyone faces: the desire for recognition, the fear of loss, the temptation to take shortcuts, the difficulty of maintaining virtue when virtue isn't socially rewarded. His willingness to discuss these struggles openly rather than presenting himself as having achieved perfect wisdom makes his insights more credible and his example more inspiring for ordinary people working on their own development. You can follow his example by approaching your own imperfections with curiosity rather than harsh judgment, viewing them as areas for growth rather than evidence of fundamental inadequacy. The goal isn't to achieve perfection, but to make consistent progress, not to eliminate all weaknesses, but to develop your strengths, not to never make mistakes, but to learn from the mistakes you do make. This growth-oriented perspective transforms failure from something to be avoided at all costs into feedback that guides future improvement. When you try something and it doesn't work out as planned, instead of concluding that you're incapable or that the goal was unrealistic, you can ask what the experience taught you about yourself, your methods, or your circumstances. What would you do differently next time? What resources do you need to develop? What assumptions proved incorrect? These questions shift you from a fixed mindset that views abilities as static to a growth mindset that views challenges as opportunities for development. The shift has profound implications for your willingness to take appropriate risks, your resilience in the face of setbacks, and your ability to maintain motivation when progress is slow or nonlinear. The Stoics understood that character development, like physical fitness, requires consistent effort over extended periods and involves temporary setbacks as part of the overall upward trajectory. Just as you might have days when your workout feels more difficult than usual without concluding that you're losing fitness, you can have days when virtue feels more challenging without concluding that you're losing moral progress. This long-term perspective becomes especially important during periods when external rewards for virtue seem minimal or when less principled approaches appear to be succeeding. The person who takes credit for others' work might receive promotion, while the person who gives credit generously remains in the same position. The individual who cuts ethical corners might accumulate wealth, while the person who maintains integrity struggles financially. In these situations, the Stoic response is not to abandon virtue, but to remember that virtue is its own reward and creates its own success, even when that success isn't immediately visible or socially recognized. The person of character sleeps peacefully, knowing their actions aligned with their values. The person of integrity enjoys relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear or manipulation. The person of wisdom experiences the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to truth rather than illusion. These internal rewards often prove more durable and satisfying than external achievements that depend on circumstances beyond your control. Social recognition can be withdrawn when fashions change or when you no longer serve others' interests. Financial success can disappear through market changes or health crises. But the peace that comes from living according to your values, the self-respect that emerges from acting with integrity, the wisdom that develops through honest self-reflection, these benefits become part of your character and cannot be taken away by external circumstances. As you cultivate these internal sources of satisfaction, you become less dependent on external validation and more capable of making decisions based on your own assessment of what's right, rather than what's popular or profitable. This independence from others' opinions doesn't mean ignoring feedback or refusing to consider different perspectives, but rather filtering input through your own moral compass, rather than automatically accepting others' judgments as authoritative. The development of this internal authority represents one of the most valuable fruits of philosophical practice. Instead of constantly seeking approval from others or following the crowd's direction, you learn to trust your own carefully developed judgment while remaining open to new information that might refine or modify your understanding. You become your own person in the deepest sense while still remaining connected to and concerned about others' welfare. This balance between independence and connection, autonomy and relationship, self-reliance and interdependence reflects the sophisticated understanding of human nature that the Stoics developed through their practices. They recognized that humans are naturally social beings who need community and relationship to flourish, but they also understood that authentic relationship requires individuals who have developed their own character rather than simply conforming to group expectations. When you bring a well-developed sense of self to your relationships, you can offer genuine contribution rather than just seeking what you can get. When you have cultivated your own sources of meaning and satisfaction, you can love others freely rather than needing them to fill psychological voids. When you have learned to appreciate your own company, you can be present with others without demanding that they entertain or validate you. These qualities make you a better friend, partner, family member, and colleague because you show up as a resource rather than a drain on others' energy. Your presence becomes calming rather than agitating, supportive rather than demanding, inspiring rather than depleting. People seek your company not because you tell them what they want to hear, but because you offer the rare gift of authentic presence and honest wisdom. The ripple effects of this kind of personal development extend far beyond your immediate relationships to influence the broader community in ways you may never fully know. The patience you practice with a difficult customer might be the kindness that prevents them from treating the next person harshly. The integrity you maintain in a small business dealing might contribute to a culture of honesty that influences others' choices. The calm presence you bring to stressful situations might help others respond more skillfully than they would have otherwise. These invisible contributions to social well-being represent what the Stoics considered one of the most important aspects of virtuous living: the recognition that individual character development serves not just personal satisfaction, but collective flourishing. When you become more wise, just, courageous, and temperate, everyone around you benefits from those improvements, even if they never consciously recognize the source of their improved experience. This understanding can provide additional motivation for maintaining your philosophical practices during periods when the personal benefits aren't immediately obvious or when virtue seems unrewarded. You're not just working on yourself for selfish reasons, but participating in the larger human project of creating communities where everyone can flourish more easily. Your commitment to growth contributes to positive social change in ways that are subtle but significant. Tonight, as your consciousness prepares to rest and your unconscious processes take over the work of integration and restoration, you can feel satisfaction in knowing that your reflections have contributed to both personal development and social good. The insights you've gained, the commitments you've renewed, the perspective you've cultivated will continue working below the threshold of awareness, gradually increasing your capacity to respond to tomorrow's challenges with greater wisdom and virtue. This trust in unconscious processes reflects the Stoic understanding that much of the most important work happens through natural development rather than forced effort. Just as physical healing occurs through biological processes that operate beyond conscious control, character development happens through psychological processes that integrate experiences and insights in ways that conscious planning cannot direct. Your role is to provide good raw material through honest reflection and principled action, then allow the natural processes of growth and development to do their mysterious work. This balance between conscious effort and unconscious process, between taking responsibility and surrendering control, between working diligently and resting peacefully, characterizes the wise approach to human development and represents the harmony with natural rhythms that the Stoics sought to achieve through their philosophical practices. The harmony you're cultivating through these philosophical practices creates a resonance between your inner state and the natural rhythms that govern all life. As you align yourself more closely with the patterns of growth and rest, effort and ease, engagement and surrender that characterize healthy development, you begin to experience what the Stoics called living according to nature. This doesn't mean rejecting civilization or technology, but rather organizing your choices around the fundamental principles that promote human flourishing, rather than the artificial demands that create unnecessary suffering. Living according to nature means recognizing that you are simultaneously an individual with unique gifts and responsibilities, and a part of larger systems that extend beyond your personal concerns. Like a cell within an organism, you have your own integrity and function, while also contributing to the health of the whole. When these levels of identity are in harmony, both your personal satisfaction and your contribution to others' well-being increase naturally without requiring constant effort or self-sacrifice. This integration becomes especially apparent in how you approach work and productivity. Instead of driving yourself through willpower alone or measuring your worth entirely through external achievements, you learn to work from a deeper source of motivation that includes but transcends personal ambition. You care about doing excellent work not just because it might bring rewards, but because excellence represents the natural expression of your human capacities when they're properly developed and directed. This shift from driven productivity to organic effectiveness often results in better outcomes with less stress because your actions emerge from clarity and purpose rather than anxiety and compulsion. When you're not fighting against yourself or forcing outcomes through sheer effort, you can access creative insights and sustainable energy that aren't available when you're operating from chronic tension. The work becomes an expression of who you are, rather than something you do to prove who you are. The same principle applies to your relationships, which flourish when they're based on mutual respect and genuine care, rather than need, manipulation, or unconscious patterns. As you develop greater self-awareness and emotional regulation through your philosophical practices, you become capable of loving others more freely because you're not depending on them to fill psychological voids or validate your sense of worth. You can appreciate people for who they are rather than needing them to be different, and you can contribute to their well-being without requiring specific responses in return. This freedom in relationship doesn't mean becoming indifferent or detached, but rather caring from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. When you have cultivated your own sources of meaning, peace, and satisfaction, you have more to offer others and less need to extract validation or security from your interactions. This creates space for deeper connection because the relationship serves mutual growth and joy rather than mutual dependence or control. The development of this emotional independence paradoxically makes you more capable of genuine intimacy because you're not constantly defending against potential hurt or positioning yourself to get particular responses. When you know that your fundamental well-being doesn't depend on any specific relationship or outcome, you can engage more authentically and vulnerably. You can express affection without needing it returned in exactly the same form, offer support without requiring gratitude, and share your truth without demanding agreement. As you practice this kind of free-flowing care in your close relationships, you may notice that it begins to extend naturally to your interactions with strangers and casual acquaintances as well. The person who has learned to love without attachment often finds themselves spontaneously kinder to service workers, more patient with difficult people, more generous in small daily interactions. This isn't forced niceness or people-pleasing, but the natural overflow of a heart that has learned to care without grasping. The Stoics understood that this expansion of care represents the natural development of human moral capacity. We begin by caring primarily about ourselves and our immediate family, then gradually extend our concern to include friends, community members, fellow citizens, and ultimately all of humanity. This expansion isn't achieved through forcing yourself to care about everyone equally, but through removing the barriers that prevent your natural compassion from flowing freely. These barriers typically consist of the fears, judgments, and attachments that make us defensive and controlling in our interactions with others. When you're afraid of being hurt, you protect yourself by limiting how much you care. When you judge others as fundamentally different from yourself, you exclude them from your circle of concern. When you're attached to specific outcomes, you manipulate rather than truly connecting. As philosophical practice dissolves these barriers, your capacity for authentic care naturally expands. This expansion of concern includes but extends beyond human relationships to encompass your relationship with the natural world and the larger systems that sustain all life. As you develop greater appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things, you naturally begin making choices that consider their broader impact rather than just their immediate personal benefits. This isn't environmental activism driven by guilt or fear, but the organic response of someone who recognizes their fundamental dependence on and connection with the larger web of life. The choices might be relatively small, like walking instead of driving when possible, buying less unnecessary stuff, eating more thoughtfully, or being more careful about waste. But they emerge from a shift in perspective rather than external pressure, which makes them more sustainable and authentic. When you truly understand that your well-being and the planet's well-being are intimately connected, caring for the environment becomes a natural expression of caring for yourself and future generations. This integration of personal and planetary well-being reflects the Stoic understanding that wisdom naturally leads to actions that benefit both the individual and the community. You don't have to choose between your own flourishing and contributing to the common good, because authentic individual development includes the capacity for meaningful contribution, while authentic service to others includes taking good care of yourself so that you have resources to offer. As these various aspects of philosophical living begin to integrate and reinforce each other, you may notice that the artificial boundaries between different areas of life start to dissolve. The patience you practice in meditation carries over into your interactions with family members. The honesty you cultivate in your inner dialogue shows up in your external communications. The acceptance you develop toward your own limitations extends to greater compassion for others' imperfections. This integration creates a sense of coherence and authenticity that brings deep satisfaction regardless of external circumstances. Instead of feeling fragmented by competing demands and conflicting values, you experience increasing unity between your different roles and relationships. The same core principles guide your behavior whether you're at work or at home, with friends or with strangers, in success or in difficulty. The development of this internal consistency represents one of the most valuable fruits of sustained philosophical practice. When your actions align with your values across different contexts, you experience a form of integrity that eliminates the exhausting internal conflicts that plague people who haven't clarified their priorities or who compromise their principles for convenience. You know who you are and what you stand for, which makes decision-making clearer and relationships more authentic. This doesn't mean becoming rigid or inflexible, but rather maintaining steady principles while adapting their expression to different circumstances and relationships. The parent expresses care differently than the professional colleague, but both expressions emerge from the same fundamental commitment to others' well-being. The response to success looks different from the response to failure, but both are guided by the same commitment to humility and growth. As you rest in this growing sense of internal coherence tonight, you can appreciate how far you've come in your philosophical development while recognizing how much room remains for continued growth. The Stoic path isn't about achieving perfection, but about making consistent progress. Not about never struggling, but about struggling more skillfully. Not about eliminating all problems, but about relating to problems more wisely. This perspective prevents the discouragement that often accompanies high ideals when they're approached with perfectionist expectations. Instead of judging yourself harshly for falling short of your aspirations, you can appreciate the genuine progress you've made while remaining committed to continued development. Every day offers new opportunities to practice virtue. Every challenge provides another chance to respond with wisdom. Every relationship presents fresh possibilities for expressing care and understanding. The journey of philosophical development is infinite, not because it's impossible to make real progress, but because each level of growth opens new possibilities for even deeper understanding and more refined expression of human excellence. The person who has learned basic patience discovers opportunities to develop profound equanimity. The individual who has cultivated simple honesty finds pathways to wisdom that illuminates truth at more subtle levels. The one who has developed ordinary kindness recognizes possibilities for compassion that transforms both self and others. This endless quality of the path ensures that boredom never becomes a problem for the committed philosopher. There's always more to learn, always deeper levels of virtue to explore, always more sophisticated ways to express love and wisdom in relationships and communities. The richness of human potential means that a lifetime devoted to character development never exhausts the possibilities for growth and contribution. Tonight, as you approach the threshold between consciousness and sleep, you can rest in the knowledge that tomorrow will bring fresh opportunities to continue this ancient and eternal journey of becoming more fully human. The challenges you'll face, the relationships you'll navigate, the decisions you'll make, all represent curriculum in the school of wisdom, where every experience teaches something valuable if you remain open to learning. The sleep you're entering isn't an escape from this educational process, but an essential part of it. During rest, your unconscious mind processes and integrates the insights and experiences of conscious life, often producing creative solutions and deeper understanding that weren't available through direct effort. Dreams frequently offer symbolic representations of psychological and spiritual development, while even dreamless sleep provides the restoration necessary for continued growth and learning. This trust in unconscious processes reflects the mature understanding that human development involves dimensions that extend beyond conscious control and rational planning. Just as physical healing happens through biological wisdom that operates below the threshold of awareness, psychological and spiritual growth occurs through processes that are intelligent and purposeful without being consciously directed. Your task is to cooperate with these natural processes by providing good raw material through honest self-reflection, principled action, and openness to learning from all experiences. Then you can trust the deeper wisdom of life itself to integrate your efforts and experiences into genuine development that serves both your individual flourishing and your capacity to contribute meaningfully to the larger human community. This cooperation between conscious effort and unconscious process, between personal will and natural wisdom, between individual development and collective service, represents the dynamic balance that characterizes mature philosophical living. It's the balance of someone who takes full responsibility for their choices, while recognizing their participation in larger systems and processes that extend far beyond personal control or understanding. As this balance settles into your awareness, and your body naturally relaxes into the rhythms of rest and restoration, you embody the harmony between effort and ease, engagement and surrender, caring and letting go that the ancient Stoics sought to achieve through their practices. You've done the work of conscious reflection and commitment, and now you can trust the natural processes of integration and renewal that will prepare you for tomorrow's opportunities to continue growing in wisdom and virtue. The peace that accompanies you into sleep is not the peace of someone who has solved every problem or achieved perfect wisdom, but the peace of someone who has aligned themselves with the fundamental processes of growth and contribution that give life its deepest meaning. It's the peace of knowing that your efforts matter, that your development serves larger purposes, and that tomorrow will bring fresh possibilities for expressing the love and wisdom you're cultivating through these ancient and eternally relevant practices of conscious living. The practices of conscious living that you've been contemplating tonight connect you not only to ancient wisdom, but to an eternal dimension of human experience that transcends the particular circumstances of any historical period. The questions that motivated Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca are the same fundamental questions that every thoughtful person must eventually confront. How shall we live? What truly matters? How do we find meaning in the face of uncertainty and loss? How do we maintain dignity and grace when life doesn't unfold according to our preferences? These questions have no final answers that can be memorized and applied mechanically to every situation. Instead, they require ongoing engagement, fresh consideration in each new circumstance, creative application of timeless principles to contemporary challenges. This is why philosophy is called a practice rather than a theory. It's something you do rather than something you merely understand, a way of living rather than just a way of thinking. The living quality of philosophical practice means that it grows and deepens through experience rather than remaining static like information stored in memory. Each time you choose patience over reactivity, understanding over judgment, courage over comfort, the principle of virtue becomes more deeply integrated into your character. Each time you practice accepting what you cannot control while focusing energy on what you can influence, the discipline of attention becomes more natural and automatic. This gradual integration creates what we might call philosophical muscle memory, where virtuous responses begin to emerge spontaneously rather than requiring conscious effort and deliberation. Just as physical skills become more fluid and effortless through practice, character qualities become more natural and reliable through consistent cultivation. The patience you have to work to maintain today may flow naturally years from now because you've trained your habitual responses through repeated conscious choice. This doesn't mean that philosophical development eventually becomes effortless or that you'll reach a point where virtue requires no ongoing attention. The Stoics were clear that maintaining excellence of character requires lifelong commitment and daily practice. But the effort does become more joyful and less strenuous as virtuous living aligns with your developed nature rather than fighting against unconscious patterns and reactive tendencies. The joy that emerges from this alignment represents one of the most surprising discoveries that many people make through sustained philosophical practice. They begin expecting virtue to feel like deprivation or struggle, requiring constant sacrifice of immediate pleasure for long-term benefit. Instead, they discover that living according to their deepest values creates a form of satisfaction that's more reliable and profound than the temporary pleasures that come from getting what they want in the moment. This satisfaction has a quality that distinguishes it from mere happiness or pleasure. It's present even during difficult circumstances because it arises from the recognition that you're living with integrity and purpose rather than from favorable external conditions. You can feel profound satisfaction while grieving a loss because the grieving itself expresses your capacity for deep love. You can find meaning in facing challenges because the facing demonstrates your courage and commitment to growth. This understanding transforms your relationship to both pleasure and pain, success and failure, gain and loss. Instead of constantly seeking pleasant experiences while avoiding difficult ones, you begin to appreciate that both types of experience contribute to your development when met with wisdom and virtue. Pleasant experiences become opportunities to practice gratitude and humility. Difficult experiences become occasions for developing strength and compassion. Both serve the larger project of becoming more fully human. The acceptance of life's full spectrum of experiences doesn't mean becoming indifferent to outcomes or failing to work toward positive goals. The Stoics were ambitious and effective people who cared deeply about their contributions to their families and communities. But they held their preferences lightly, working diligently toward desired outcomes while maintaining equanimity regardless of results. They discovered the secret of caring without attachment, of investing fully while surrendering the outcome. This balance between engagement and detachment becomes especially important as you mature in your practice and begin to recognize the broader patterns that govern human experience. You notice that periods of expansion are followed by periods of contraction, that gains often alternate with losses, that life moves in cycles rather than straight lines toward ever-increasing happiness and success. This recognition helps you maintain perspective during both fortunate and challenging phases. When things are going well, you can enjoy the good fortune while remembering that circumstances will inevitably change, which prevents excessive attachment or the anxiety that comes from trying to make temporary conditions permanent. When facing difficulties, you can address them skillfully while remembering that these too will pass, which prevents despair and maintains hope for better times ahead. In both cases, you remain grounded in the present while maintaining awareness of life's larger rhythms. This cyclical understanding extends beyond personal circumstances to encompass the natural rhythms of rest and activity, solitude and relationship, learning and teaching that characterize healthy human development. Just as your body needs both exercise and recovery, your psyche needs both engagement with challenges and periods of peaceful integration. Just as plants require seasons of growth and dormancy, human beings flourish through alternating periods of expansion and consolidation. Recognizing these natural rhythms helps you work with your energy rather than against it, pushing when pushing is appropriate and resting when rest is needed. This prevents both the burnout that comes from trying to maintain constant high activity and the stagnation that results from avoiding necessary challenges. You learn to read your own needs and cycles, honoring both your capacity for effort and your requirement for renewal. The wisdom of honoring these rhythms becomes especially apparent during the transition to sleep that you're experiencing now. After a day of conscious choices and active engagement with life's demands, your system naturally seeks the restoration that comes through releasing control and allowing unconscious processes to take over the work of healing, integration, and renewal. Fighting this natural transition creates tension and insomnia, while cooperating with it promotes both better rest and more effective activity during waking hours. This cooperation with natural rhythms reflects the broader Stoic principle of living in harmony with the nature of things rather than imposing your will through force alone. The wise person recognizes that sustainable success comes through understanding and working with the patterns that govern reality, rather than trying to override them through willpower or manipulation. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of everything that happens, but rather skillful response that takes into account both your goals and the conditions that will influence their achievement. The skill of working with reality rather than against it develops through years of practice and observation, learning to recognize when effort is appropriate and when acceptance serves better, when to persist and when to pivot, when to lead and when to follow. These are arts rather than sciences, requiring intuition and judgment rather than rigid rules or formulas. They develop through experience and reflection rather than through theoretical study alone. As you mature in these arts, you may notice that your relationship to uncertainty and unpredictability begins to shift. Instead of experiencing the unknown as primarily threatening, you start to appreciate it as the source of possibility and growth. Instead of trying to eliminate all risk from your choices, you learn to make decisions that balance security with adventure, safety with growth, comfort with challenge. This comfort with uncertainty becomes especially valuable during major life transitions when familiar structures dissolve and new patterns have not yet emerged. Career changes, relationship beginnings and endings, geographical moves, health challenges, and other significant shifts often involve periods of not knowing what comes next. The person who has learned to find stability within change rather than seeking stability through controlling circumstances can navigate these transitions with greater grace and less anxiety. The stability that emerges through philosophical practice is internal rather than external, based on character rather than circumstances, rooted in principles rather than dependent on particular outcomes. This internal stability provides the foundation for authentic confidence that doesn't require external validation or perfect conditions to maintain itself. You know who you are and what you stand for regardless of what others think or what situations you encounter. This self-knowledge includes honest recognition of your limitations and areas where growth is still needed, but it doesn't depend on achieving perfection to provide a sense of worth and identity. You can acknowledge your imperfections while appreciating your progress. Recognize your weaknesses while building on your strengths. Accept your humanity while aspiring to excellence. This balanced self-regard prevents both arrogance and self-deprecation, creating space for continued development without the pressure of impossible standards. The freedom that comes from this balanced relationship with yourself extends to your interactions with others and your engagement with the larger world. When you're not constantly defending against criticism or seeking validation through achievement, you can respond to situations based on their actual requirements rather than on what will make you look good or feel better about yourself. When you're not attached to particular outcomes, you can invest fully in worthwhile projects while remaining flexible about methods and timelines. This freedom allows for greater creativity and spontaneity in your responses to life's challenges and opportunities. Instead of following rigid scripts or trying to control every variable, you can adapt fluidly to changing circumstances while maintaining your core principles and commitments. You become more like water, which maintains its essential nature while taking the shape of whatever container it encounters, finding its way around obstacles while continuing to flow toward its destination. The metaphor of water was beloved by both Taoist and Stoic philosophers because it captures perfectly the combination of persistence and flexibility that characterizes wise living. Water doesn't fight against rocks in its path, but flows around them, gradually wearing them smooth through patient persistence. It doesn't resist being channeled into new directions, but adapts to whatever course serves its fundamental nature of flowing toward the sea. As you embody this water-like quality in your own life, challenges become less frustrating because you don't expect the path to be straight or obstacle-free. Setbacks become temporary detours rather than permanent defeats because you maintain awareness of your ultimate direction while remaining flexible about the route. Criticism becomes information to consider rather than attacks to defend against because you're not rigidly attached to any particular self-image. This fluid responsiveness, combined with clear direction, represents the mature fruit of sustained philosophical practice. You know what matters to you and why, but you're not brittle or defensive about expressing these values in changing circumstances. You can adapt your methods while maintaining your principles, change your strategies while preserving your integrity, modify your plans while remaining true to your deepest commitments. Tonight, as your conscious mind naturally releases its grip on planning and controlling, you can rest in the knowledge that this flexibility and strength have been growing within you through every moment of honest reflection and every choice to respond with virtue rather than react from habit. The person who will wake tomorrow will be slightly more capable of meeting whatever challenges arise with grace and wisdom, slightly more able to contribute meaningfully to others' well-being, slightly more aligned with the timeless principles that promote human flourishing. This growth happens not through dramatic transformation, but through the accumulation of countless small choices and insights that gradually reshape your character and expand your capacity for excellent living. Like a river that carves through stone through patient persistence rather than violent force, philosophical practice works slowly but irresistibly to wear away the obstacles to wisdom and create clear channels for virtue to flow naturally through your thoughts, words, and actions. The peace that accompanies you now into restorative sleep is the peace of someone who has spent this time wisely, engaging with the fundamental questions of human existence, not as abstract philosophical puzzles, but as practical guides for living with purpose and integrity. You've connected with wisdom that has guided thoughtful people through every kind of challenge and circumstance, wisdom that will continue to guide you as you face whatever tomorrow may bring. This ancient wisdom lives now in your own understanding and commitment, ready to inform your choices and sustain your courage when you need it most. The words you've heard tonight will fade from memory, but the insights you've gained and the resolve you've strengthened will remain as permanent additions to your character, resources you can draw upon whenever life tests your patience, challenges your principles, or invites you to grow beyond your current limitations. In the gentle darkness that embraces you now, the timeless dialogue between human aspiration and reality continues its eternal conversation, not in abstract philosophical debates, but in the lived experience of someone committed to growing in wisdom and virtue through whatever circumstances arise. You are part of this conversation now, not just a student of ancient teachings, but a practitioner carrying these principles forward into contemporary life, contributing your own chapter to the ongoing story of humans learning to live with greater consciousness, compassion, and courage.